Some rulers inherit crowns, others seize them. Shajar al-Durr did neither. She began as a possession, a concubine in the palace of the Ayyubid Sultan al-Salih Ayyub. No lineage, no claim, no right. And yet, when Egypt stood on the edge of collapse, it was her hand that held the state together. A former slave who defied kings and caliphs, who ruled in her own name, and who paid the ultimate price for daring to step beyond the lines of her time. This is her story. She arrived in Egypt as property. Sources disagree on her origin. Some say Turkic, others Armenian, but all agree she was brought to Cairo as a slave. In the palace of al-Salih Ayyub, she became more than a concubine. She became indispensable. Al-Salih was a shrewd, cautious ruler who trusted very few. But Shajar al-Durr proved herself loyal, intelligent, and discreet. She bore him a son, Khalil, and soon gained a place closer to his councils than most of his generals. In the cutthroat politics of the Ayyubid court, survival demanded silence, calculation, and timing. She mastered them all. In 1249, crisis struck. Louis IX of France, leading the Seventh Crusade, landed his forces on the Egyptian coast. The Crusaders, hardened by past campaigns, marched south toward Cairo. And at that exact moment, al-Salih Ayyub, the Sultan of Egypt, died. It could have been the end. Had word spread, the army would have broken, the people panicked, and Egypt left open before Europe's might. But Shajar al-Durr chose silence. Orders were still issued in his name. Messengers rode out as if nothing had changed. Even the royal seal was pressed as before. For weeks, Egypt's enemies did not realize they were facing an army with no living sultan. Her deception bought Egypt the time it needed to survive. The test came at the city of al-Mansura. The Crusaders forced a crossing of the Nile and expected an easy march toward Cairo. Instead, they found themselves trapped in narrow streets where their cavalry could not maneuver. Arrows fell from rooftops, spears struck from alleyways, and heavily armored knights were cut down in the choking confines of the city. What began as a bold advance soon dissolved into chaos. At Fariscour, the retreat collapsed into disaster. Thousands were killed, and Louis IX himself, the King of France, was captured alive. It was a humiliation Europe would not forget. And behind Egypt's survival was the woman who had refused to let panic rule. With the Crusaders defeated and no male heir strong enough to rule, the question of succession could no longer be delayed. The army, the palace, and the people all turned to the figure who had already been governing in reality. In 1250, Shajar al-Durr was declared sovereign of Egypt. Coins were struck in her name. The Friday prayer, the khutbah, was read in her honor. She styled herself Mother of Khalil, tying her rule to the memory of her late husband and their son. For a brief, extraordinary moment, Egypt had a woman as its sultan. The streets reacted with unease. Some whispered in disapproval, others marveled at the stability she had preserved. But markets steadied, prices dropped back toward normal, and caravans moved again. For most Egyptians, what mattered was not ideology, but order, and Shajar al-Durr delivered it. Not everyone was so willing to accept her rule. From Baghdad, the Abbasid caliph sent a mocking reply to her request for recognition. "If Egypt has no men left, we can send you one." Yeah, it was a calculated insult, a reminder of the limits of her legitimacy. But Shajar al-Durr did not yield. Egypt remained steady under her hand. Shajar al-Durr also understood the power of memory. She completed her husband's grand complex in Cairo, a mosque, madrasa, and mausoleum combined. She built her own mausoleum nearby, adorned with marble, mosaics, and inscriptions designed to proclaim her authority long after her death. Stone, she knew, would outlast politics. But power in Egypt was not hers alone. The army that had saved Egypt was now dominated by the Mamluks, former slave soldiers who had risen to power. They respected her, but they wanted a figure they could control. To preserve her position, Shajar al-Durr agreed to marry one of their leaders, the commander Izz al-Din Aybak. On paper, he was sultan. In practice, she remained the mind behind the throne. For years, this uneasy balance held. But power breeds ambition. Aybak began gathering allies of his own. Rumors spread of him seeking another marriage alliance that would sideline her. To be replaced, to be discarded after all she had built, was more than humiliation, it was a threat. In 1257, she struck first. Aybak was murdered in the palace baths. For a moment, it seemed like her old cunning might prevail again. She had outmaneuvered chaos before, but this time, the tide had shifted. The Mamluks, once a single body, were now divided into factions. Aybak's supporters moved swiftly, framing her act not as the defense of Egypt, but as palace treachery. The legitimacy she had once claimed through necessity now slipped away. Retribution was brutal. Chroniclers say she was beaten to death by the women of Aybak's household, struck down with wooden sandals, then cast from the citadel. A punishment designed not only to kill her, but to strip her of dignity. The woman who had captured a king. And yet, she was not erased. Her tomb still stands in Cairo, its inscriptions still legible. Her story survives in chronicles that both praise and condemn her. What do we make of her? Was she right to hide the Sultan's death? The captured king in chains answers yes. Was she right to kill Aybak? The silence of her broken body answers no. History rarely gives clean verdicts. What it gives is scale. And on that scale, Shajar al-Durr remains one of the most extraordinary rulers Egypt ever produced. A slave who became a queen, a strategist who saved a kingdom, and a woman whose ambition left a mark that stone could not erase.